Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. In this video, I'm going to react to why Americans are obsessed with big cars. Now, this is something that I believe is true, because whenever I've been to the States, I've been struck by how much bigger the average car is. And I've wondered, why is that? Is it because maybe the roads are wider? So I guess in a way, it influences people to drive bigger cars. Is it to do with the mindset of the average American, where maybe bigger is seen as better? You know, is it seen as a value thing? Like, if you can get a big car for, let's say, 10,000, you know, why would you buy a smaller car for a similar amount of money? Because here, the cars are just way smaller on average, way smaller. But I think that's probably to do with the fact that it's a much smaller country. The roads are smaller. Like the average pickup, like an F-150, for example, you would struggle to get that down a lot of the country roads here in the UK. You'd have a hard time. You'd have to go really slow because a lot of the country roads are two lane systems. So you've got a going lane and a coming lane. You know, if you're going around a bend at 30 miles an hour, and another car just comes out of nowhere and you're in a big pickup, mate, you better stop, otherwise you're gonna lose your side mirror. It's gonna be fun to learn why Americans like bigger cars. It's gonna be really interesting. Let's do it. Wow, that car's huge.
Americans love big cars.
It's huge, and the width as well.
Big cars they're fun, they're roomy. I mean, this thing, when you go down the road in it, people notice it.
The US is the country of Cadillacs with massive tail fins and oversized pickup trucks.
We are all about wide open spaces here, and we drive big cars because we can.
Compared with Europe or countries like Japan,
the Fiat 500, man, this car is so popular among typically women under the age of 24.
the market for bigger cars in America is just, well, bigger. In Europe, for example, small cars like city cars, subcompacts, and compact cars made up more than 35% of sales in 2021. In the US, the same three segments made up just over 10% of sales.
Big
Consumer
difference.
demand has driven automakers to make vehicles bigger and bigger.
Do you think it might be because maybe the average American is also a larger person than the average European? So you're going to need more space, aren't you?
Regulatory loopholes favoring trucks, say some industry analysts, have helped the shift. Big cars are more expensive, often much more, and especially if they burn gasoline, more harmful to the environment. They take up more space on the road and in parking lots. They are also much more fatal in car accidents.
Our current system of regulating safety of vehicles is not providing a check on.
Hold on, I thought a bigger car would be, if you were in a bigger car and you crashed, you'd be safer, wouldn't you? Because there's probably more airbags, there's more material to absorb the energy of the impact compared to a smaller car.
On the weight of vehicles and the disparity of weight across the fleet.
CNBC looked into America's obsession with big cars and why it matters.
It's so wide. I love that steering wheel though.
This car is huge. It's almost 20 feet. Why are
20
they so
feet.
big?
Because they could be. Gas was a quarter when this car was made. Who cared what the gas mileage was? And we wanted comfort, and we wanted style, and we wanted space.
This is Rick Payton. He is a General Motors loyalist. He loves Cadillacs, and especially Cadillacs from the brand's heyday in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. At that time, big cars meant something similar to what they mean today. Luxury, comfort, and status. Driving a lumbering Cadillac or Lincoln Continental signified that you are a person living the good life.
My aunt had a 79 Coupe de Ville, and I remember that car as a kid and fondly remember it.
He has two classic Cadillacs and a Buick in his garage in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and several more such cars in a shop a few towns away.
This is a Cadillac Eldorado. This was the king of the heap in '55. So this was the most expensive car that
I love the paint job. I love the color. It's like a candy, peach, orange/pink.
they made. This is the second most expensive car they made in '55. This is a '55 Fleetwood. So cool things about this. Where would you put gas in this car?
No way. Wow. That is unique.
Car's about probably 19 feet something.
His collection shows the American obsession with big vehicles stretches back decades. Cars such as his Cadillac Fleetwood were the most desirable rides of their day.
This was the king of the heap. I mean, they didn't make a more luxurious car in the United States in 1961 than this. This is one of the biggest cars that you could buy at the time. This was the SUV of the day. This is the closest representation of what an Escalade is back.
I love the speedometer. This is just so unique. Never seen anything like it.
then.
Ed Kim runs Auto Pacific, which conducts surveys and other research for automakers, suppliers, and others in the auto industry.
One of the things that researchers commonly ask is, what size of vehicle do you want next time? And there will almost always be a significant number of people that say, I want something bigger next time.
Customers express preferences for bigger vehicles. Automakers respond to that. Take, for example, the BMW 3 Series, an iconic performance sedan. When it was first introduced, it was far smaller than it is today.
A lot of people kind of consider the E36 generation, which came out in the early 90s, to kind of be the ideal embodiment of what a 3 Series should be. But it just kept getting bigger, to the point where now it's not so far off from what the 5 Series was not that long ago.
Kim says that
I think, though, that that's potentially... BMW are obviously trying to cater to the American market. They probably see the American market and maybe the Chinese market as the two really big growth markets. So, you know, if the sedans or the saloon cars in the States are bigger, they're going to have to make their cars bigger too, to kind of get a piece of the pie.
this kind of size creep, where automakers bulk up a specific model over time, might result from misinterpreting survey data.
Automakers take that data very literally and take that to mean, okay, we need to make the next generation of this vehicle bigger. And then because automakers always benchmark each other, other automakers end up doing the same and they make their vehicles bigger, and the cycle goes on and on and on.
Researchers at Consumer Reports have found evidence of size creep, especially among pickup trucks. The group found that the hood height of passenger trucks, such as the top-selling Ford F-150, the Chevrolet Silverado, and even mid-sized trucks, has increased by an average of 11% since the year 2000. New pickup trucks grew 24%
Is that because of a bigger engine?
heavier on average from 2000 to 2018.
On some of these, you know, what they call heavy-duty trucks, like the Ford F-250, the 2500 series Ram and Silverado, the front edge of that hood is now 55 inches or more off the ground, and that's as tall as the roof of some sedans.
The reintroduced Ford Ranger is bigger than the outgoing version that was discontinued in 2011. In fact, when Ford dropped the old Ranger in 2011, it said it did so because not enough people were buying small trucks to keep producing it.
It isn't necessarily that trucks themselves are getting bigger. It's more that when a bigger option is available, more customers buy it.
I saw a Ford Ranger the other day, actually. I quite like the Ford Ranger, but then I saw it in person, and it is huge. Like, maybe it's just big compared to like a Range Rover, like the stuff that you would typically see here in London. Because I thought a Ranger was like a small, compact pickup truck, like quite nimble and agile, but this thing looked massive, especially compared to like the other cars, you know, on a British road, which are quite small. You know, you're usually quite, you know, we're talking like 2-3 door cars, maybe some saloons here and there. This Ranger looked absolutely gargantuan.
SUVs, crossovers, and pickup trucks now dominate car sales. Some researchers say that regulations have incentivized automakers to make bigger vehicles. Kate Whitefoot is a researcher who has studied emissions rules. She says that when the government started regulating fuel efficiency in the 1970s, rules didn't take into account the size of the vehicles an automaker sold. But a lot of companies importing into the US market were selling smaller cars that by nature burned less fuel. So in the early 2000s, new regulations introduced what is called a footprint-based standard.
That meant that automakers that sold larger vehicles could meet less stringent regulations, and that was built out of this desire to kind of protect the US-based automakers and fairly distribute impacts across the different automakers.
That created an incentive to build larger vehicles in 3 ways. One is that the standards themselves are based on the sizes of vehicles that automakers are producing. The more large vehicles they produce, the lower the regulatory target they have to hit is. That in itself can create an incentive to shift toward larger vehicles. Secondly, the revised rules split vehicles into 2 categories: passenger cars and light trucks, which includes SUVs and pickup trucks.
If a vehicle is classified as a light truck, then it also has less stringent regulations compared to if it was classified as a passenger car.
Lastly, if a vehicle is big enough, it doesn't fall under the rules at all. It is no longer considered a light-duty vehicle. It is now considered a heavy truck. Whitefoot and fellow researchers did a study in 2011 that basically predicted the repercussions of such laws.
When we evaluate those trade-offs, does this incentive exist under these regulations for automakers to increase the size of their vehicles? And we did see that it could under quite a large set of scenarios.
And a company the size of, General Motors or any large car manufacturer, any advantage they can find, any way to, save money on costs or regulations, they're going to do it, aren't they?
While the overall size and weight of the fleet haven't changed all that much, they have taken off in certain segments, especially in pickup trucks. Since the mid-1990s, pickup truck weight on average has increased over 1,000 pounds.
Wow.
Research has found that in the event of a crash, a 1,000-pound increase in weight increases the chance of a fatality by 40 to 50%.
Wow, this shocks me.
The problem is that other people on the road can't choose how big the vehicles around them are. They also can sometimes create situations where a crash that may have been avoidable isn't as avoidable. So we found that some trucks have front blind spots that are 11 feet longer than in some sedans and 7 feet longer than in a lot of popular SUVs.
We've seen like what we call an arms race in vehicle size and weight because, if I'm concerned about my own safety, I'm just concerned about, is my vehicle bigger and heavier than other vehicles around me?
Everyone's going to get a bigger car.
So vehicles, as a result, get larger and larger and larger because people just want to outcompete each other.
Big cars tend to be more expensive than
human psychology is really an interesting thing, isn't it?
Small ones.
We've seen median transaction prices rise pretty considerably over the last few years. Part of that is due to the simple fact that small entry-level vehicles have increasingly been disappearing from US showrooms.
Automakers are axing small models. The Toyota Yaris is gone from the US. Ford discontinued just about all its passenger cars, including its Focus and Fiesta. Chevrolet got rid of the Sonic and the Cruze.
The Focus is like one of the most popular cars in England, I would say. Like the Fiesta is most people's first car. It was my first car.
The Hyundai Accent and Kia Rio are on their way out. The Nissan Versa sells just a fraction of what it used to. And that applies for entire brands specializing in small cars, like Fiat. They have left the US entirely.
Wow.
Meanwhile, Fiat's American sister brands, Ram and Jeep, have become tremendously successful, selling some of the most popular vehicles available today: big SUVs and pickup trucks. While small cars are tough to sell in much of the US, they are still popular where roads are too narrow, gas is too pricey, and parking too scarce to justify hulking pickups or SUVs. But SUVs are seeing serious growth in Europe too. An analysis from Jado Dynamics has found that in 2018, about 30% of new cars registered were SUVs. In 2021, that number had reached nearly 40%. That popularity comes at the expense of small cars, which have gone from 49% of share in 2018 to about 42% in 2021. That trend has continued in the first half of 2022.
Very interesting.
There's a possibility that the rise of electric vehicles could change all this. Electric powertrains take up a lot less space in cars than do internal combustion engines. With more interior space, some industry analysts say it is possible Americans will seek out smaller cars simply because new EV vehicle designs will make better use of a car's total footprint.
Also, a bigger electric car is going to need a bigger battery, won't it? So, but won't it take longer for the battery to charge? So if you don't really need, a huge car, like, plus, don't you have to pay for the electricity? Like, if your car's going to be using a lot more electricity because it's bigger, that's going to cost you more. I don't really know much about how electric cars work in terms of the electricity and how you pay. But yeah, like, it's a similar sort of principle as a petrol car, isn't it? In terms of the bigger it is, the more expensive it is to run, right?
Tastes change too, even after decades of obsession. Peyton has lately developed a fascination with small, agile British cars. He bought a 1961 MG-A, which is dwarfed by the size of his Cadillac.
I've always flirted with British cars. They're interesting. They look at a different way to do it.
American GIs became obsessed with cars like these during World War II. That obsession unnerved American car makers enough to prompt the creation of a new generation of smaller, more agile American cars, such as the Corvette, the Ford Thunderbird, and eventually the Ford Mustang. Each a legend in its own right.
The whole start of the Americans' love affair with the automobile and sports cars, that all came out of English cars.
No way. You learn something new every day. What a great video. I suspected that, it was a safety thing or maybe a size thing, and the size element wasn't even mentioned. I do think that might be a reason, because I guess if, let's say, I don't know if this to be true, but let's say the average American is, 15, 20 pounds heavier than the average Brit, just for example, or the average European. You're going to need a bigger car if you've got a family of, let's say, 6 or 5. Like, because trying to fit all of those people in a small sedan, it's not going to be very comfortable. Whereas if you've got a big SUV or pickup, it's far more comfortable. I think that might be a factor, but it wasn't mentioned, so I guess it's not. I was really surprised that fatalities, involving bigger cars are higher, because I just thought, a bigger car, I've always heard that a bigger car is safer because, there's just more airbags, there's more material to absorb the energy. But I guess if everybody has a big car, then the energy's, fairly similar that's going to be hitting all these vehicles. So maybe that's the reason for it. Very, very interesting. Let me know what your opinions, guys, are, and if you agree with the points brought up in the video or my opinions at all. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.